Next week, we will be hearing from Carolyn Willikes, who is a veteran rider who has ridden horses all over the world, including Mongolia. So it should be a very interesting lecture. On March 3rd, we have Carol Matouche, who unfortunately won't be able to come, but we will do the lecture here anyway in the auditorium. It will be zoomed in and also online, like all our lectures. And last but not least, we have Marianne Everly coming in March. So please put all those on your calendar. Another event I want to mention is the visit to the grounds of the American School of this lovely horse named Stella, who's coming on Family Day on February 26th, in which we hope families will come and bring their children. It's a very tame horse. And I love the fact that its name is the same name as the Ephor, Stella Christoulaki, who excavated the horse burials at Phaleron. Anyway, so that's going to be a fun event. I remind everyone that if you want to go visit the exhibition, it will be open to 10 o'clock tonight. It's open on Thursdays late. And the rest of the week, Wednesdays, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it is open from noon to 6. Sorry, yeah. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome a wonderful friend and a great scholar, Judy Behringer, who is professor of Greek art and archaeology in the classics department at the University of Edinburgh. Judy is a true representative of the European Union. She teaches in Scotland, lives in Germany, and spends most of her free time here in Greece roaming around archaeological sites. She earned her BA in art history at George Washington University and her MA and PhD in classics at Yale. And before moving to Scotland in 2005, she taught at a variety of US colleges, namely Middlebury, Vassar, and Bard. She's also taught on several occasions back at Yale and has been no stranger here at the American School. She was an NEH National Endowment for Humanities Fellow and served as director of our summer session. Professor Barringer's scholarship is prodigious. She has written a textbook on Greek art and archaeology and monographs on the Nereids, on the Greek hunt, and on architectural sculpture and Greek art. She has edited a festschrift for her Yale professor, Jerome Pollitt, and co-edited with François Lissarrague the papers of an international conference sponsored by the Leventis Foundation entitled Images at the Crossroads, Media and Meaning in Greek Art, which I think has just appeared this year. I could go on, but I specifically want to highlight this recent and most important book, which came out in 2021, entitled Olympia, A Cultural History. Now, I wish I'd had that book as I led 3 trips to the Peloponnese in my position as director of the school. But it will serve future generations of American School faculty who lead this trip. So I urge all of you to go out and buy it. It has been hailed as an indispensable resource, I'm quoting, destined to become a classic, and the first synoptic cultural history of Olympia in English. So tonight we will hear from Professor Barringer about, and the title of her lecture is, Aristocrats and Horses in Democratic Athens. Before she comes up here, I want to remind the online audience that you can submit questions on the chat tab, and we will also, of course, entertain questions from the audience. Just wait for the mic to come to you, and we will address as many questions as we can tonight. Again, thank you for coming. And Professor Barringer. First, welcome to clean off the program.
Καλησπέρα σας. Είμαι πολύ ευχαριστημένη να είμαι εδώ στην Αθήνα ξανά. Thank you, Jennifer, for those very kind words and a very kind introduction. And thank you for the invitation to give this lecture here at the American School. And most of all, I want to thank the American School, which has made a huge difference in my life and my career. It has given me more than I can possibly express. So thank you all for being here this evening. The evidence for monumental equestrian statues in Athens in the late 6th and 5th centuries BC is slim, save for the marble horsemen on the Athenian Acropolis. Okay, here. Yes, thank you. Scholars often explain the scarcity of such monuments by citing socio-political factors, specifically that democratic Athens eschewed such ostentatious images because of the association of horses with aristocrats. Other scholars disagree, and this talk seeks to add support to this counterclaim using archaeological and textual evidence. Here, I suggest that equestrian imagery and events may have appealed to a non-elite public precisely because of the elite connotations attached to horses, and I wish to demonstrate that equestrian statues were more widespread in Athens than claimed. Because this talk is rather sprawling, it might be helpful to have a general map of where I'm going. A brief introduction will set forth some recurrent themes in the talk, then we'll move on to chariot racing and Athenian equestrian statues of the 5th century BC that commemorated chariot racing victories. The next part will consider freestanding equestrian statues more generally as attested or suggested by other media, including written sources. Finally, we'll return to the issue of social class and horses. Just to delineate the parameters, in my discussion of the Panathenaea, I will leave aside tribal competitions as well as the apobates race, and instead concentrate on individual equestrian competitions. And I will only speak about the 5th century BC with a couple of exceptions. Horses were ubiquitous in Athenian life and iconography, and hippic events were part of the Panathenaic Games, as we see from Panathenaic amphorae such as this one, and as we know from victors' lists. Being called a horse's ass is not considered a compliment today, but it may have signified strength and perhaps speed for the ancient hoplite. And of course, we also see entire horses used as shield devices, as here, and sometimes all of the horse appears, but neatly divided as on the front and back of this Attic black figure amphora. As you will know if you have seen the Hippos exhibit, the horse protome and hindquarters also appeared on Athenian 6th century silver coinage with the protome on a didrachma, while the devalued hindquarters appear on a drachma. Horses occur on scenes of warfare, warriors' departures, and images of warriors mounting chariots, as here. Horses were used in labor, as transport, for racing with and without chariots, and in the hunt, as in the predella of this vase, where they were standard deer and boar hunting companions because of their speed and agility. As modern scholars, we tend to lose sight of the slowness of the ancient world. Although we calculate the time it took to travel here and there, by boat, on foot, on horseback, we do not often consider what it would be like to live in a world without the capacity for speed save for horsepower. In a world where one usually traveled on foot while on land, the spectacle of a horse galloping at full speed, a sight so loud and fast, must have been wondrous, arresting as it is for many of us today, as if the creature could take off at any moment and fly like a bird, like Pegasus. And I am leaving aside here the pure aesthetic beauty of these majestic animals, something that Xenophon remarked about when talking about horses galloping. It is no wonder that Poseidon, the earth shaker, was credited with having given the horse with its thundering stride to mankind. And indeed, the power of the animal and of the god were interchangeable in many respects. And here we see Poseidon on a winged horse, and he's actually carrying a trident in his right hand. The ability to harness the remarkable speed of horses was usually attributed to Athena, the inventor of the bridle and patron goddess of Athens. It is striking that although there are Athenian images of horses free of any outside control, they are uncommon. Instead, depictions of horses usually show the animals equipped with bit, bridle, and reins, sometimes yoked, harnessed, ridden or walked, but with that massive power, both strength and speed, under human or divine control. And I show you this example. I'm sorry the photo is not so good, but I couldn't resist because I love the horse's eyes. Détienne offers an illuminating discussion of aspects of the horse, who is nervous, unpredictable, and highly excitable, qualities also expressed by the Gorgon, who, impregnated by Poseidon, bore Pegasus. As we can see on this Attic white ground lekythos on the right, you can see Pegasus emerging from the Gorgon. Centaurs also share these characteristics, and we should note that centaurs are unrestrained by any equestrian tack. Détienne also remarks on the consequent need to control horses by means of a powerful force, such as the bit and bridle provided by Athena. According to ancient Athenian dramatists, these equestrian qualities of excitability and wildness were shared by unmarried girls, who were likened to fillies in need of being yoked, that is, controlled by marriage. This concept is visually manifested by juxtaposed images on an Attic red figure Eurybalos in Winterthur, where one sees an unfettered horse on one side and a swiftly moving Parthenos on the other. The natural characteristics of horses, earth-shaking power, excitability, unpredictability, are shared by Poseidon, the god associated with these marvelous animals. One scholar has observed that Attic vase paintings of the Gigantomachy that include Poseidon, such as the one that you're seeing here, and on the right of the screen you can see Poseidon with his trident very close to the handle. So the scholar has observed that such Attic vase paintings often depict the horse as an instrument of death to a foe fallen on the earth, that the horse can trample the enemy and literally pound him into the earth, expressing the god's eminence over this domain. He is the earth shaker. And we might think here of centaurs, especially the episode of Caeneus being pounded into the ground by centaurs. In other words, the horse can serve as a lethal weapon. Poseidon is also closely connected to chariot racing, a theme to which we now turn. Poseidon is repeatedly invoked in the Pindaric odes in honor of quadriga winners, and one can think of the myth of Pelops' victory over Oenomaus at Olympia, shown here, where the Elean hero was given winged horses by Poseidon, seen to the very far right of this image. Poseidon, of course, was Pelops' erstwhile lover. Equestrian events appear at Olympia already in the 7th century BC, the quadriga in 680 and the horse race in 648, and by the 5th century BC, quadriga racing was the most esteemed contest at Olympia. In Athens, equestrian events appear already in the Panathenea festival around 566 BC. Here, for example, on the Bergen amphora of the same date, we see a reference to the biga competition on the reverse of the vessel, which is on your right. The use of horses in sport and hunting and warfare was synonymous with elite status in ancient Greece, including Athens. Some scholars claim that the introduction of the Kleisthenic reforms instigated an anti-elite response from the demos. This would explain certain phenomena, such as the sumptuary law mentioned by Cicero, which is credited with the absence of stone grave stelae around 470 to 430 BC, the secession of stone koroi and korai as grave markers, and changes in vase painting iconography. According to this line of thinking, the association of horses with the elite, such as assumed to be the case for the archaic marble horsemen of the Acropolis, was responsible for a perceived diminution of interest in individual equestrian events in Athens and a diminution in Athenian participation in equestrian events elsewhere in the course of the 4th century. I say perceived because this claim is based on victors' lists, of which we have a very incomplete record. And we know that equestrian events, including the quadriga race, continued in the Panathenea on the basis of the extant Panathenaic amphorae. Likewise, according to this thinking, this reaction against the elite would explain the absence of monumental quadriga victory sculpture in Athens in the 5th century, in contrast to the notable presence of such monuments at 2 great Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries, Delphi and Olympia. After all, chariots are the preferred means of transport for gods and heroes. We can see Hector here over towards the left, and his name is inscribed above him. And the chariots also had Homeric and elite associations. And we can see that here as well on this Attic red figure Kylix showing Athena and Heracles. When did this practice of life-size bronze quadriga monuments serving as athletic victory monuments begin? The earliest such monumental chariot race victory monument in Greece is that of Kleisthenic of Epidamnus, Olympic victor in 516, known to us only from Pausanias. While all other attested 5th century quadriga victory monuments at Olympia and Delphi were erected by monarchs from Sicily. For example, Gelon, tyrant of Gela and Syracuse, at Olympia in 488 BC, and I show you here the base at Olympia. The top portion of the base, which is partial on the right, shows the inscribed portion just here. I'm hoping this works. Okay, it doesn't seem to be working, but on the top part of the base at the right is the inscription indicating who this base was for. Other monarchs from Sicily in the 5th century who erected monuments at Olympia or Delphi are Hieron of Syracuse at Olympia in 476, and probably Polyzelos at Delphi in the 470s here. While this practice seems to have a Western Greek origin, and let us not forget the coins of Sicilian and South Italian cities, for example, those of Syracuse minted from around 530 to 330, particularly silver issues with quadrigas fashioned on their obverses, and here's another example. This sculptural practice was later taken up by mainland Greeks, as we witness in the quadriga monument of the royal Spartan Kiniska, who proudly declared on the inscribed base that she was the first woman to have won in the Olympic chariot race. And she also made a second quadriga dedication at Olympia. And there are many other later such monuments for quadriga victories at Olympia, as known from inscribed bases and from Pausanias. So the thinking goes, Athenian equestrian victors eschewed this form of commemoration with its ostentatiously elite character in deference to democratic cultural norms, that such monuments smack too much of tyranny or the aristocratic class and were therefore unfit for Athens during the period of democracy. This, then, would explain the absence of equestrian victory monuments in democratic Athens. Other scholars disagree, and I too have challenged this interpretation of social history in my study of Athenian hunting images, specifically those of hunting on horseback from the late Archaic and Classical periods. The form of Athenian government and organization of the populace changed with the institution of the Kleisthenic reforms in around 508/7, and participation in government was open to a much larger proportion of the population than previously. But social attitudes and customs did not automatically change, and of course this is always the case. Law doesn't change attitudes. The elite still set the social agenda throughout much of the 5th century in Athens, and the leading statesmen of Athens were almost exclusively of the elite class. Indeed, it is my view that the increase of Attic vase painting scenes of hunting on horseback in the early classical period, particularly on symposium wear, was indicative of aspirational desires of both elites and non-elites. The elite continued their desire to be linked to heroic ideals of the past, exemplified by such images, while non-elites may have desired to associate themselves with a cachet of elite equestrian life. This aspirational attitude on the part of the non-elite toward equine imagery may be detectable already on the archaic Athenian Acropolis. A carpenter, a tecton, dedicated a marble statue of a horse on the Acropolis around 530 to 520 BC, as we know from the inscribed Pentelic marble base with a restored length of around 1.60 meters. And in fact, there were monumental bronze equestrian statues in Athens in the 5th century BC. 2 quadriga victory dedications stood on the Athenian Acropolis. A Pentelic marble base with a restored length of 2.40 meters was inscribed with a dedication by Sostratos, and I show you that here. The base probably carried a bronze quadriga as indicated by cuttings, and Rabacek dates it to the beginning of the 5th century BC. A second monument of around 450 to 440 BC, life-size, commemorated several quadriga victories of a man named Pronapes in the Nemean, Isthmian, and Panathenaic games, as we know from the inscribed base. The group included a quadriga, an image of Pronapes, and another figure, perhaps the groom, and I show you here one of several possible reconstructions, this one by Manolis Korez. This Pronapes is likely to have been the same Pronapes, one of 3 cavalry commanders, who dedicated yet another bronze equestrian monument on the Acropolis, a youth and horse, which was funded by war booty around 457 to 430 BC, and we know the occasion for this dedication and the persons involved from the inscribed base outside the Propylaea. It is noteworthy that this joint dedication by the 3 cavalry commanders, Pronapes, Lacedaemonios, son of Cimon, and the strategos Xenophon, who died in 429, is the first certain attestation of the Athenian cavalry. While we do not have extant evidence of many equestrian statues in Athens in the classical period, and I think it is worth remembering that we have very few large-scale bronze sculptures at all from the 5th century BC, we do have evidence of others, though none that can be connected to individual victories in equestrian events. Because of their fine spots, scholars have posited that marble parts of a horse right hind leg, which you see above, and what's surviving is a knee and a thigh, here you're seeing the knee, that were found in front of the Dipylon Gate may derive from a state monument in the Demosian Sima, and that a bronze hoof, down below, from a late classical life-size monument may belong to a monument in the Kerameikos. Now I turn to the next part of this discussion. In addition to remains of actual equestrian statues, 5th century vase painters created images of horse statues, suggesting that the painters were familiar with them even after the Persian sack, when they wouldn't have been standing anymore, as we see here on a cup attributed to the foundry painter. The horse standing on a base, that is, a statue, depicted here on the Schliemann Lutrophoros of around 400 BC, and that figure is on the far left. My pointer doesn't seem to be working anymore, so I'm just telling you where it is. This horse, which is on this vase dated around 400 BC, is distinctive because of its size and central placement in the image. It is usually classed with a group of warrior lutrophoroi, large vessels decorated with scenes of warfare, thank you, dating from 490 BC to the end of the 5th century. All 14 examples were found in Athens, and at least 4 derived from the Kerameikos, where they were found scattered around, but not in, the grave. Scholars suggest that these vessels commemorated the war dead, perhaps in private ceremonies. So now, thank you, Marion. So now here's the horse standing on a base here. The Schliemann Lutrophorus' size, estimated at 1.28 meters when complete, suggests that it served as a grave marker, and scholars have proposed that it was a cenotaph for a fallen cavalryman who was buried in the Demosian Sima. On one side, a nude youth, recognizable by his beardlessness, and it's the figure on the right in the center, right here. This figure is equipped with a pilos, spear, and shield. He faces a clothed old man, indicated by his white hair and beard. Here he is standing in front of this warrior, and the old man gestures with both hands toward the nude figure. A female standing behind the old man looks in the direction of the nude youth. Behind the nude youth is a youthful compatriot draped with a chlamys, wearing boots and grasping a spear. So I'm speaking about the figure at the very, whoops, I went too fast. A figure at the very far right. Oh no, I've done something here. Sorry. A figure at the very far right here. On the other side, here, a youth indicated by his bound up long hair and beardlessness, so I'm talking about the figure on the right side of the screen standing before the horse. This figure stands before a stepped grave monument. He wears an ornately decorated chiton, laced boots, and vegetal crown. He holds spears in his left hand, and a petasos is slung around his neck. Two females stand behind him. This male faces a similarly clad figure on horseback, whom we see in the left slide here, who is also sporting the same type of crown and carries one spear. Behind the mounted horseman on the left is a youth wearing a chlamys and petasos and holding a stick laden with game from a successful hunt. So all the way over at the left. An Amazonomachy circling the entire vessel appears in the smaller frieze below. Some scholars think that the figure gazing at the rider, that is the figure on our right here, gazing at the rider on our left, that the standing figure represents the deceased commemorated by the tomb monument, who gazes at himself, although we should note that the boots and belts of these two figures are not identical. Previously, I agreed with other scholars in viewing this painted horse sculpture as possibly reflecting a real image in the Demosian Sima commemorating the death of one or more cavalrymen. Thus, we would have a warrior's departure on one side, on the right, and memorialization of a deceased warrior on the other, on the left, perhaps, as some have suggested, a hoplite on one side and a cavalry member on the other, which would make it unlikely to be the same person unless they've moved from one to the other realm in terms of military service. It is true that the extant reliefs from cavalry monuments in the Demosian Sima, like this one, are unlike this image. The marble reliefs depict battle activity, unlike the quietly standing horse, ridden by a wreathed young male attired in a finely decorated garment. But I think that the lack of caparanda here should not exclude the possibility of a range of monuments devoted to the war dead. Nonetheless, I would like to take this occasion to modify my earlier opinion. I now question whether the scene at the tomb refers to warfare or exclusively to warfare. The game-laden stick slung over the youth's shoulder on the left, the same figure's attire, and the lack of armor suggest hunting imagery. While the two sides of the vessel may represent different moments, in other words, readiness for warfare and the hunt in the deceased male's life, either actually lived or missed because of an early death, the equestrian statue has no clear link to warfare save for the sheathed dagger and spear. So the dagger is right here at his left side, and one can see the spear going across his body. But these implements are also common attributes of hunters, as we can see here in this Attic red figure kylix, where the two hunters attacking a deer have swords or daggers. And here we have another Attic red figure kylix showing a man wielding a spear towards a boar, and I would ask you please to note his finely decorated chiton and his boots. The vegetal crowns, so now I go back to the lutrophorus. The vegetal crowns, perhaps of laurel, refer to victory or to an honor, but must this honor concern warfare? In any case, the Schliemann lutrophoros was probably a tomb marker. The equestrian statue painted on the vessel may not reflect an actual statue at the same grave marked by the lutrophoros, but like the marble horse legs and bronze hoof found near the Kerameikos, offers some evidence that such statues once existed at 5th century Athenian graves, perhaps even in the Democean Sima. Literary sources might also point to equestrian statues that are no longer extant. On the basis of a brief mention in Sophocles, scholars speculate that an equestrian statue of the hero Kolonos stood in the sanctuary of Poseidon Hippios on the Hippios Kolonos in Athens. And I show you here this beautiful 19th century map showing the hill here, and in a more modern rendering, it's just here. The Athenian cults of Poseidon Hippios and Athena Hippia, who were worshipped at the Hippios Kolonos sanctuary, where Poseidon possessed a temple, were of great importance to the city. Both Sophocles and Aristophanes link Poseidon Hippios with cavalry matters, and among the items in a late 5th century BC inventory made by the Neochoroi of the sanctuary were equestrian trappings. Poseidon Hippias was the father of Theseus, who performed sacrifice to his father on the god's altar on Hippias Kolonos in Sophocles' Oedipus at Colonus. And Pausanias relates that a heroon to Theseus, Pirithous, Oedipus, and Adrastos stood on the Hippias Kolonos. The correspondence of the ancient location of Hippias Kolonos with the modern hill of Hippias Kolonos, seen on the map on the right, is usually assumed, although the hill itself has revealed no ancient remains. So without archaeological evidence to support it, the suggestion of an equestrian statue here must remain only that, although the sanctuary of Poseidon Hippias would, of course, be an apt place for an equestrian statue. But classical period tombs found near the hill suggest burials for the class of Hippes. Scholars have noted previously that equine imagery, for example, vase paintings, that such imagery was abundant at all periods on the roads near the Hippias Kolonos. Among these finds is the well-known marble stele of the later 4th century BC, which was reused in a Paleo-Christian grave and was found west of Larissa Station, not far from Hippias Kolonos. Whether this relief was a grave relief, part of the public monument of the Democean Sima, or was a votive in the Hippias Kolonos sanctuary, the stele suggests the elite class. And Palaya has pointed out various aspects of the relief that make this clear, including the size, but also the presence of an African slave, his fine attire, and the saddlecloth. The stele is, of course, beyond the period that is the focus of this talk. But another example found in this area is an inscribed stele, which you've already seen, of around 420 to 400 BC, which was recovered in the Paleologo ventilation shaft near Larissa railway station. The stele honors cavalry fallen in the battles of Tanagra and Spartalos in Halkidiki. That is, this relief marked a tomb that was part of the Democean Sima. If, as one scholar suggests, the cavalry may have received their own casualty lists distinct from those commemorating all the fallen in a given year, it may be that some of these were erected on or near the Hippias Kolonos. As additions to this list of equestrian statues and possible equestrian statues, I think we might consider two other instances where one might expect equestrian statues. So now we're in the realm of pure speculation. Herodotus tells us that Kimon won the quadriga race at Olympia 3 times with the same set of mares, who received special burial near Chimon's grave. And we also know that the flamboyant Alcibiades entered 7 different chariots in one competition at Olympia and unsurprisingly won. Ancient literary accounts indicate that Alcibiades' victories were commemorated with painted pinaces, but perhaps Alcibiades or Cimon erected something more elaborate in bronze, either in Athens or at Olympia, or perhaps the tomb of Cimon's horses was decorated with an equestrian monument. Athenians did dedicate quadriga victory monuments at some Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries. For example, we have an extant inscribed base at Delphi, and the size, 3.18 by 2.52 meters. And this base has cuttings for a quadriga. The inscribed epigram, dated to the first decades of the 4th century BC, relates that the monument was dedicated by Callias, the son of Hipponacos, and let us note the father's name, and it mentions Callias's victories at Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmia. I would like to return to the issue of the perception of horses and aristocrats in democratic Athens. The monuments I have been discussing, actual equestrian athletic victory statues, probable equestrian grave statues, possibly a monument to the hero Kolonos in the shrine of Poseidon Hippias, should cause us to rethink simple notions of how the political system and cultural practices should go hand in hand. We know that the cavalry was elite, but must we assume that hippic activities, including sports, were always regarded as anti-democratic because they were done by elites? Disapproval of horse racing is a topos in Athenian comic literature of the late 5th century. Think of Aristophanes' Knights, for example. But there is not evidence of this earlier on, and I hasten to add that literature, particularly drama, is not and was not intended to be a documentary of real life. If there had been such strong resentment against wealthy Athenians and hippic activities, it is hard to explain how victors at the Pan-Hellenic Games in some equestrian events, including the quadriga race, so we're talking here about the horse owners who have the victory, these victors enjoyed meals at public expense in the Prytaneion in 5th century Athens, as we know was the case from an inscription of around 440 to 432 BC. One might expect that such a privilege would have been curtailed had democratic disapprobation of such elite activities been the prevailing cultural norm. In other words, horses were connected with the elite. But this association did not negate the presence of hippic monuments and activities among Athenians, both in Athens and elsewhere in the 5th century. Statues of horses are part of the same phenomenon. They continue through the democracy, as do the use of hippic names in Athens. While one might argue that certain equestrian events of the later 5th century Panathenaea were connected with military preparedness and therefore possibly exempt from public disapproval, hippic competitions, the single horse race, the quadriga race, the apobates contest, continued to be part of the Panathenaea, even as tribal hippic competitions were added to the roster of events. These tribal equestrian events may be part of the same phenomenon that I described earlier, a desire to emulate the elite, in this case democratizing equestrian activities and or appropriating equestrian events from those who previously had an exclusive monopoly on them. Indeed, 4th century writers indicate a growing resentment of the elite's hippic activities, or more precisely, the wealth that allowed them to pursue such concerns. Let us return to the Acropolis, where Poseidon and horses feature prominently. The Parthenon's west pediment is decorated with Athena, inventor of the bridle, and Poseidon, the god associated with horses and quadrigas, who are shown in the middle. So Athena here, Poseidon here, so in the upper slide on the far right. And we should note that this central motif of the two gods is flanked by quadrigas. The frieze, situated on the western half of the Parthenon, is filled with horses, whose power and excitability are scarcely contained by their unarmed mounts. Poseidon is also worshipped in the Erechtheion, where a Pentelic marble relief of around 400 BC was found. And of course, this is in the Hippos exhibit. The Stele, presumably a votive relief, is carved with a flying figure on the left, surely Nike crowning a galloping horse moving to the left. The dedication is intriguing because the horse is described by scholars as being crowned for a horse race victory. But there is no trace of a harness, bridle, reins, other horses, or a human, though admittedly such details could have been painted on. And we see a single horse, not a team. The motif of a horse being crowned by Nike is well known from 5th and 4th century Sicilian coins, such as those we saw earlier here, and again here. But in these cases, the horses draw quadrigas. Appreciation and praise of individual horses is attested in literature and on Attic vases, such as this magnificent one. And Seth Pevnik has recently argued that Kalos inscriptions on a number of Attic vases may refer not to a human being or beings, but to some notable horses. He supports his argument by pointing to the well-known anecdote of Pausanias concerning a horse race at Olympia. The mare, Aura, threw her rider, Phydalos of Corinth, while running the race, yet the horse completed the race and was declared victor. Her hapless rider was permitted to erect a statue, as was the custom at Olympia for Olympic victors, and he did so, but rather than showing himself, the sculpture was of the horse alone, and the inscription sings Aura's praises. Likewise, I wonder if the Acropolis relief may honor an exceptional horse, rather than only, a human equestrian victory. I thank you for your attention.
I might. Thank you very much, Judy. I think you made a very convincing case about, the prevalence of these hippic monuments in the 5th century, although, we don't have large-scale sculptures. I am going to open the floor here to questions while I try to deal here with the chat. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you in a minute. Okay, there's mostly rave reviews here on the chat, like what an incredible talk. So, thank you, Judy. So let's just see if there's some questions. I'm very bad at making this thing move.
Selini has a question. Yasu, Selini.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. Thank you. Two remarks. The first one concerns names, use of names with hippos, the beginning or finishing with hippos. Like you mentioned Hipponikos, son of Callias, and he had a daughter whose name was Hipparete, the wife of Alcibiades. And it will be interesting to see if this continues in the 4th century, or if we can't get something from this, apart from commonly from Hipparete and Hippias, Hipparchos, and these people. And the second one concerns this beautiful vase from the Ceramaikos that you showed us, with a horse and a stele. Mm-hmm. On the coins of Olynthus, mm-hmm. we have a coin, we have a horse, sorry, mm-hmm. a horse, mm-hmm. and a column. And I propose to interpret this, because it's not a scene of athletic scene or games or whatever, as a reference to Chalkis and to the great funerary column in the middle of the agora of Chalkis that commemorated, according to Aristotle, the victory of the Chalcidian Thracian cavalry over the Eretrians in the Lelantian War. These, of course, are things that were invented later or whatever, but the coin dates from 432 BC. It's the moment that they revolted from Athens and they go back to their roots, let's say, to Chalcidic Euboea. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this suggestion. This is excellent. And I'm going to chase you down afterwards to find a reference to some literature on this coin. And as for the names continuing in the 4th century BC, it's something I need to investigate. I didn't want to go too wide in this material because things do change in the 4th century to some degree. I mentioned the literary sources indicating a greater and greater disapproval of elite activities, i.e. of the elite, in the 4th century BC, although a lot of these sources are, of course, law speeches, where the entire point is to kind of defame your opponent. Of course, it's appealing to a certain populist notion, so it's doing its work, and there has to be some possibility of resentment there in order to bring it to the surface. So thank you. I will look into both of those things. I appreciate it.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here. One is asking, is there any evidence for representation of masked horses, as in cavalry? Well, we do have that on the frieze. We have, as a matter of fact, 250 horses on the Parthenon.
Jennifer, did you say mass? A mass?
Well,
like
he's asking here, are there any representation of masked horses?
I heard masks.
Or wild horses, as in roaming herds, perhaps something connected to Thessaly or Macedonia. Or maybe later than the 5th century. I don't know of any, but...
I don't know of any on vases, but it would be hard to show a mass of horses on vases, of course. The Alexander mosaic, of course, we see a massive cavalry there, but this is much, much, much later.
Okay. Here's a comment that it's interesting that that aristocrats associate themselves so closely with horses when the same aristocrats also gave their sons names like Lacedaemonius, showing their Spartan sympathies, yet there was no cavalry in Sparta. There was cavalry.
I was just going to say there was cavalry in Sparta, but I wasn't certain, so I didn't want to say it because I'm not a cavalry expert. We had the cavalry talk last week. So this is not accurate.
Somebody want to?
Nigel. Hi, Nigel. Now you have to say it into the microphone.
I just said that the Spartan cavalry was later. The only people who were associated with, or soldiers who were associated with horses at this point, the early, I suppose, to the mid-5th century in Sparta would be the hippes, who were infantrymen,
right?
Whatever the reason for their name is. I have a question that might not be answerable. Using a modern parallel, horse racing today is an elite sport. It always is. It's expensive. But it connects with the rest of us through gambling. And of course, we have, in the earliest description of a chariot race, we have gambling, a bet. Is there any evidence for people betting on horse races or any other sort of race involving horses?
The answer is I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there were. When you first began speaking, and you were talking about a modern parallel and talking about horse racing today, I thought you might say, but you didn't, and maybe you would disagree with this, that one of the kind of phenomena of modern horse racing. Okay, we have it at the elite class where they have the ascot and stuff like that, right? And the royalty go and so on. But when we think of gambling at horse racing, we tend not to think of the elite class, on the contrary. And it's tremendously popular with those who have no money whatsoever, and who are willing to gamble away whatever they do have, so that even though it is an aristocratic sport associated with elite, it appeals to the masses. But the betting question is a fabulous one, and if anyone has some ideas, I certainly welcome them.
Okay, there's a question here about the decoration. What do we know about the decoration of sculpture of horses? I think the person is referring to gilding, paint, and things like that.
On the actual horses or in art?
Yeah, on these monuments, on sculptures.
On sculptured monuments. That's really hard to answer since we don't have large-scale bronze sculptural monuments of horses in the 5th century BC. We have small things, like at Olympia, we have, of course, the geometric bronze horses. But from the Severe style, for example, there's a magnificent, very famous horse from Olympia in bronze, about so big, which is in very good condition, but I don't recall seeing any gilding on it. And we have no large-scale bronze equestrian statues remaining from Olympia. What we've got are the bases, right? And there's some fragments and bits and pieces. But beyond that, we don't have it. So I can't answer the question because, at least from what I know, but maybe somebody here knows of gilt horses. There's one big exception, of course, is Demetrius Poliorcetes, this statue in the Athenian Agora, where we have gilding on that one. And that survives in remarkable condition.
Well, we do have evidence, say, in the Medici Riccardi horse in the exhibition that it was gilded, and the gilding is not later. It's
on the Medici
it's the
head.
same date. Yeah, it's the same date as the horse. It's 4th century.
So it's okay. So it's a
yeah,
part
and
of the
things like
original.
bridles were added, and
Yes, of course.
accoutrements, tack were added to the heads of the horses.
And of course, we have bronze attachments to all the marble
right,
reliefs.
and all the riders on
this is normal.
On the Parthenon have bronze reins and things like that. There's a question, have you seen any trends in the frequency of imagery depicting a quadriga compared to a biga over time?
That's really a question for you, Ms.
Well,
Panathenea.
I was struck in studying this that in the Iliad they're usually driving bigas, and the horses are referred to in the duel. And that continues with the gods. I mean, the gods on the east metapiece of the Parthenon are riding bigas, whereas the chariot seems to be mostly, there were two horse chariot races, but the 4 horses really do seem to be used for racing, although we have depictions, of course, in the 6th century of warriors going to war in a 4-horse chariot, or wedding scenes, which is this ennobling of the bridal couple or the warrior, but they probably didn't go off in 4-horse chariots. But it's interesting that the gods tend to be in for instance, you showed the West Pediment; those chariots flanking the gods are bigas, 2-horse chariots.
Although in the Attic black figure amphora that I showed with the Gigantomachy, where Poseidon is present in that image, that's a quadriga. And so the gods there do have quadrigas in battle.
Zeus usually is shown in a quadriga.
Yeah.
That's true. In the Gigantomachy, that's right. Anyway, that would be, you could look at Panathenaic amphoras and see how often there were, but it's mostly for chariots. Did we see another question out there? Yes, here, Layla. Yanni.
Thank you, Judy, for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering, we have a lot of images of barbarian women riding in Athens. What do we know about Athenian women? Did they ride elite women? Do we have any information?
That's a really great question, Jenny.
With the female, they have the women have, elite women have horse names, but that might just have nothing to do with riding, I guess.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of vase painting images, which is where we expect to see such a thing, right? I can't recall any at this moment. Jennifer, do you know?
I was thinking, I can think of goddesses riding other things, but not, do they often ride horses? Thinking about Aphrodite.
Poseidon appears on a horse,
but
only twice.
Female gods.
Yeah. So, but I think it's quite rare to see deities on horseback. The chariot is the thing for deities. Jennifer, can you think of an example of women on horseback?
Well, I know Etruscan women rode horses because they've done some forensic work on a skeleton that was found in one of these sarcophagi, actually in the British Museum, and they could tell from her bones that she'd had an accident from a horse, from falling off a horse. Also, we know that Etruscan women had chariots, carts, and horse carts and things in their tombs. So they rode, but they were more liberated than Athenian women.
I've actually wondered, this is not on the women question, but since you mentioned the chariots and tombs, I've often wondered if the Sicilian custom of these monumental chariot race victory monuments at these Pan-Hellenic centers may have been influenced by Etruscan kings and these tombs where you find these chariots and that it connects with the idea of kingship through contact with the Etruscans, because I don't know where this comes from otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jenny, I don't have an answer to the question.
I think Layla had a question down here.
Did I understand that?
Can you wait for the mic, Layla? Sorry, so we can hear you. Thanks.
You showed two fragments of a bronze horse from the Kerameikos.
I showed one marble fragment above, and then the bronze hoof below, and both were found near the Kerameikos. So one, the kind of elbow thing, was marble, and the other one is bronze.
And do you assume that there were statues of riders in the Kerameikos?
We know that there were statues of riders in the Kerameikos. Think about the Eastern rider that was found along with the Kouros and the lion a few years ago in the Kerameikos.
Where?
In the Kerameikos? Where exactly in the Kerameikos? I'm not sure, but they're in the Kerameikos Museum, yeah? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, in the first room on the left-hand side, down at the end of the room against the window.
A statue of a rider?
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
A funerary statue?
Yes.
Archaic.
Archaic. It's late
yes,
archaic.
Of course,
yeah.
I speak of the. Yes, of course, I speak of the fifth century,
Okay.
fifth and fourth.
Okay, I wasn't clear on what you were talking about. I'm sorry.
Yes, of course, in the archaic, it's usual.
Yeah, no, we don't. Not to my knowledge, except for possibly these pieces. But as I said, tell me of any large-scale bronze sculpture from the 5th century BC that survives in Athens. There's not so much. I'm sure that there is large scale, maybe somewhere, or parts of it somewhere, but we don't have so much anyway,
yes.
In any case. But the bronze hoof is life-size. That is of a life-size monument near the Kerameikos.
And it is to date in the 5th century?
Yes, it's, I think, late 5th century. I'm just going to check my notes. I don't want to speak without checking. Late classical life-size monument. May belong to a monument in the Kerameikos, yes. I can give you the reference later. I have it here. Late classical, okay,
So
it could be 4th century. Yeah,
yeah.
it could be 4th century.
On the theme of women riding, back to the women again, I do remember there's a cup in Boston with a woman sort of sliding off the side of a horse, and she's labeled Sparte.
Ah.
Yeah, and there are those little, lots of those little bronzes that show women riding side saddle.
Yes.
Found in,
Yes, yes.
geometric bronzes, but I can't, Nigel
Nigel,
wants to come.
We
Has some
want your
comment.
contribution.
Oh, sorry, did you want to
sorry.
say something? No.
Very simple one. They're riding on astrabae. The astrabae is a wooden side saddle that women and cripples and Dionysus rides.
Right, of course.
It's connected somehow with the hero Astrabakos, who's the person who, or the hero who helps discover the effigy of Artemis Orthia in Sparta. But you can, in fact, see quite a lot of them, and when you see women sitting side-side, or they're sitting on that sort of construction.
Okay, yeah.
Are these the metal reliefs?
Lead.
From the Orthia? Lead reliefs.
Oh, no, there's no depiction of them there. It's in Pausanias.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't know that.
At the Hyacinthia, though, girls did drive carts of some sort. So, there are equestrian women besides Caniska, in Sparta. Yeah.
And I would guess that Caniska probably rode horses, the Spartan princess.
I don't see.
There's one in the back. I can't see the person, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
Thank you so much. This is very much outside my area, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head about the statue base from the Acropolis, the supposed first dedication of the Athenian Demos, which is a quadriga monument after the victory over the Boeotians, and I'm wondering whether and how this may fit into your argument about elite or non-elite perceptions of horse monuments.
That's you have reminded me of something that I had forgotten to include in this talk, although I wasn't thinking so much of military monuments, but that's a very good example. I would have to think, I don't want to just answer off the bat. I have to think about it because I hadn't thought about this military victory monument aside from the 3 cavalry commanders monument. But I would think that it's simply more evidence of equestrian statues, number one, and this is very important. And I don't think it has to be connected with the elite because the military is fighting, the military was not only the cavalry. We don't have any evidence for the cavalry, certainly before the mid-5th century BC. Whether the horse represents a cavalry victory or not, I don't know. So I'm going to stop talking about it because I'm just going to talk myself into a corner. But thank you for reminding me of that. It's going to go into this talk. Thank you.
So, another question, back to gender again. Were mares and stallions treated any differently in works of art, such as victory monuments? And a follow-up, is horse breeding an exclusively elite activity in the 5th century?
Well, that's what I'm arguing against, that I think it is an elite activity. If you have horses, you've got money. Does it mean it's anti-democratic?
No.
I don't know. Do people think that? I've argued against that. I don't think so. And the question about mares versus stallions, in terms of freestanding sculpture, large freestanding sculpture, how would we know? We only know what is usually told to us in literary sources. But we tend to see, when we do have statues like the little bronze from Olympia, they tend to be male, the stallions.
Yeah. Sorry.
That little bronze from Olympia, this is a stallion.
I think the default, is male. Horses, by and large, on the Parthenon and everywhere, they're male. But in the exhibition, of course, we have that wonderful little Pyxis from Brauron, which is associated with Chimon's 3 wins that you mentioned at Olympia, and it specifically said in the text that they were mares,
yes.
And these are mares on that Pyxis. So
yes.
That's a real historic document. So someone's wondering in regard to the democratization of horses, if you have considered the impact of the catastasis that was introduced around that time that may have increased the ability of the lower ranks of society to acquire a horse. This is a subvention given by the state, the Athenian state, to allow people to buy horses. So it allowed the lower ranks of society to acquire a horse and train in horsemanship through this financial aid from the government.
Possibly. we have evidence of the law? Do we have evidence of the reaction to the law and how that might have widened the use of horses? I would guess that it may be part of this democratization, and it would fit well with what I've spoken about the broadening up, tribal, hippic activities, all of this kind of stuff, so that more people can do this thing. And of course, there are people who would argue, okay, it's tribal, right? So it makes it part of the democracy. It's controlled within the tribe as opposed to individual persons being promoted in society. But of course, individual hippic events not connected with the tribes continue all the way through the Pan-Athenaeum, all the way through. So these two things, I think, can exist side by side, but there is a growing widening, I think, of the use of horse racing and horse sports among the non-elite, but usually subsidized in some other way, either through tribes or through this subsidy.
As I remembered it, it really has to do with this big expansion under Pericles, too, of the cavalry going from 300 to 1,000. Mm-hmm. So you would have needed to help people buy, and they gave also money for fodder, so to feed the horses. There's a question here. I mean,
the thing about the fodder is connected to that inscription that I was talking about, which allows the victors in various Panhellenic contests to be fed in the Prytaneon at public expense. That they also think there's some question. One scholar suggested this also applies to feeding the horses as well. Sorry, I just want to add that.
Be fed for life. There's a comment here that there's a mention in Diodorus of the wealth of the people of Agrigento, who used to build funerary monuments for their horses and birds. I didn't know about that.
I didn't know that.
That's
fascinating.
We'll have to look that up. Thank you for that comment. What do the bird monuments look like? Okay, well, I think we should wrap it up, but I thank you all for the questions, all of you who wrote in online, and all of you here who came tonight, and we have a reception downstairs. Let me remind you that the exhibition just across the way is open until 10 o'clock, so you can run over and look at that wonderful relief from the Acropolis that Judy was talking about and try to decide for yourself what's going on. But thank you very much, and thanks, Judy.
Thank you.